Good evening and welcome to The World. I'm Yalda Hakim. Now, it's the forgotten war that's resurfaced as a very real threat with the potential to spiral out of control. Some may be surprised that Syria's conflict is once again back in the headlines, but for others, it was just a matter of time. That's because the fight between Bashar al-Assad's forces and militant groups has been bubbling, and external factors have now tipped the balance. It's no secret that Syria heavily relies on Russia. It is, in fact, Putin's jets that are currently bombing rebel-held positions. And then there's Iran. Iran-backed militias have entered Syria to support Assad's fight against the rebel uprising. The Iranian president has spoken to the Russian president and they've expressed unconditional support for the Syrian government, according to a readout. Tonight, we'll hear from the White Helmets in Aleppo, who are doing what they can to help those caught in the fighting. But first, here's our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Buncle.
Russian and Syrian fighter jets have been striking Aleppo and the surrounding countryside to slow the rebel advance. Idlib was also hit hard today. Streets were blown apart in a city already hollow from years of civil war. The fires still burnt as rescue workers hunted for survivors. But it was mostly dead bodies that they pulled from inside the collapsed buildings.
We're witnessing right now the most dangerous attacks, which is from the air warplanes attacking the northwest Syria, where we operate.
Syrian rebels are strengthening their hold on Aleppo despite Russian and Syrian attempts to push them back.
Allahu Akbar.
Videos filmed near Aleppo airport and posted on social media show fighters celebrating the capture of air defences. The opposition leader has said that his forces will press on unless the Syrian government agrees to negotiate.
The
main goal of this military operation is to achieve peace and stability in Syria. But to achieve that, and as long as we see that the regime doesn't respond to the demands of the people, this military operation will continue.
Around 300 Iranian-backed militia from Iraq are said to have crossed into Syria to fight the rebels. And Iran's foreign minister was in Turkey today for talks on the developing situation.
The Islamic Republic of Iran announces its full support for the Syrian government, people and army. We will continue to stand beside the government, people and army of Syria as we did before.
Syria is a country torn apart and divided many ways. But President Assad still has a strong support base. Many Syrians see him as the least worst option. This rebel offensive is the largest threat to his power for a long time, though. But he has refused to negotiate in the past and looks to be digging his heels in again and fighting back. Alistair Buncle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, war has been a reality for Syrians now for 13 years, leaving 500,000 people dead and up to 13 million displaced. One humanitarian organisation, the White Helmets, has been there from the start. Officially known as Syria's Civil Defence, they're essentially made up of volunteers who have saved lives and support communities caught on the front lines. We were hoping to speak to one volunteer on the ground in Aleppo, but the situation on the ground, of course, is proving too difficult. However, I did catch up with Ammar al-Selmo, a White Helmets board member currently in Turkey. Have a listen.
We are responding in Idlib area. We don't have teams before in Aleppo. So we are responding in Idlib area, but the regime attacking Idlib, all the city of Idlib. For example, yesterday attacking camps in Idlib, attacking the hospital in Idlib, attacking four main neighborhood market in Idlib. So the team did not, wasn't able to reach all the area in Aleppo and in other area that are attacking. For example, in eastern Aleppo today, there was a massacre. Hundreds of people died in Safira city, eastern of Aleppo. We saw video from there. We sent the team this evening because the team is not based there before. So we have to respond according to the situation. But the aircrafts all the time in the sky, attacking every area, attacking the market, attacking the populated area. For example, yesterday attacking Baghdad Square in Aleppo, and attacking yesterday the university, the hospital university in Aleppo. So
And
this
we're hearing
attack,
about,
claiming.
as you say, we're hearing about hospitals being targeted as well in places like Idlib.
Yes, they attacked Aleppo hospital because we were taking the injuries to Aleppo hospital, but they attacked the Aleppo hospital, and we have to transfer those injuries more than 40 kilometers to Idlib. But today the regime attacks the Idlib hospital. So right now there is no chance even to take them to the border. So it's like a big journey for everyone, and we are losing lives because of these attacks on hospital.
Do your teams on the ground have enough supplies, especially those caught up in the aerial bombardment in Aleppo, for example?
Our team haven't the ability to cover all this area. We know before many international organization, foundation based in Aleppo, where they are. We don't see them after what happened in 27th of November. All the international organizations that are based in Aleppo did not respond right now. The Red Crescent did not respond. The UN have the office in Aleppo, they did not respond. So there is like a big and a huge need on the ground, but we cannot cover all this area. We need support, we need vehicles, we need team. We have just like a small number of teams that cannot cover all this area.
Are you worried that the situation is going to escalate in Aleppo and beyond? Because, of course, as you say, for the last year, there have been attacks in those areas. But this is now back in the sort of attention of the international community. And if the rebels continue to move, the army, Bashar al-Assad's army, with the help of perhaps the Russians and the Iranians, will try and push them back.
Yes, I think Assad continued to attack this area because he want to send a message he still exists and he still reach all this area and impact this area. And 1 million could return to Aleppo because around 1 million of living in the camps could return to their homes. So Aleppo already contained 2 million. So the 3 million in Aleppo, with this escalation, with these attacks, for example, people the second day trying to reach their homes, they were killed at the entrance of Aleppo. And right now we are hearing that Iraqi militia could came. So if Iraqi militia came, I think also this will radicalize the situation because the troops and the groups that enter Aleppo trying to like do something good, like trying to send a good message to the people and to the community and to deal with that people. We don't see looting in the government institution. We don't see violence in the street. They try to do their best, but with the entrance of Iraqi, could return the scenario of radicalism because this will be like a sectarian war and civil war.
That was a member of the White Helmets. We've got Dominic Waghorn here with us. I mean, Dom, the situation in Syria is always quite complicated for viewers to understand, but it is a complex situation on the ground as well. And again, it's quite extraordinary that it's been thrust into the limelight, and it could potentially become a theatre for, international infighting.
Yes, it could go in a number of directions, and I think people watching will be pretty confused because I think they will have thought the Syrian civil war hadn't ended but had come to some kind of sort of point of stasis. It's a war that goes back to 2011 in the sort of wake of the uprisings in Tunisia, Egypt and Libya. Syria rose up as well. Syrians rose up in opposition to the Assad regime that has governed them as a dictatorship for decades. And it began as demands for political reform. But when it was brutally cracked down on by the Assad regime, it then turned into effectively a civil war and then a kind of proxy war with all kinds of countries steaming in and helping different sides. So the Iranians, Hezbollah, the Turks, the Gulf countries, the Saudis, and to some extent the Iraqis, and then the Kurds, obviously.
The Israelis.
And the Israelis involved in different ways as well. But it kind of ended up with the Kurds, with American support holding the northeast, a part of the northeast, holding on there. and a kind of killing zone where all the rebel groups were forced into in Idlib. And the assumption was they would eventually get finished off. But they've held on tenaciously. And now they've taken advantage of the fact that they've been regrouping. They're a pretty well-equipped organisation, and as they are successful militarily, they take more and more weapons. So they've got helicopters, they've got air defence systems, they have pretty advanced missile weaponry as well. But also, because of the shift in what's happening in their neighbouring country in Lebanon, particularly the weakening of Hezbollah, they've managed to get more powerful. And in a very surprising move, suddenly they burst out of Idlib and retook Aleppo, the city that they were routed from by the Syrians who are backed by the Iranians and by Hezbollah and by the Russians, of course. The Assad regime on its own would not have been able to prevail. But with the support of these powerful allies, it was able to crush this rebellion and stick it into a corner of the country. But from that, it has sprung back. And the question now is, does it have the momentum to push further south? Because the Assad troops were routed unexpectedly, literally deserted their positions. Have they got the ability to now push on to Hama and then possibly down to Damascus as well?
What's extraordinary about this, Dom, is that it took the Syrian government 4 years to take this area, and it took this rebel group, made up of a number of other rebel groups, about 4 days to retake it, which, as you say, caught everyone by surprise. The big question now is, Bashar al-Assad, heavily dependent on the Iranians, on the Russians. They are preoccupied in other areas at the moment. I mean, obviously, Russia in Ukraine, and Iranian proxies have, as you say, Hezbollah, that had supported Bashar al-Assad, has been decapitated effectively in Lebanon. Will they be able to support Bashar al-Assad this time around?
That, I think, is a big question, because, as you say, the conflict has kind of been pickled in formaldehyde over the last few years, but the world has moved on. So the Russians, as you say, heavily engaged in Ukraine. There's a limit to the support they can give Assad. It was seen as Putin playing a blinder, getting involved in Syria, giving himself a kind of base there, sort of enlarging his sort of regional power and prestige, and he's been instrumental in supporting Assad. But, you know, he is now distracted heavily by what's going on in Ukraine. He's trying to pour everything into that war to try and get to a position where, if negotiations happen, which many people expect, he's going to be in the greatest position of strength as possible. The Iranians also have been weakened, of course, by the uprising in Iran, by massive economic problems. The fact they've kind of lost credibility completely and legitimacy amongst their own people. And Hezbollah, of course, now massively weakened by Israel, decimating them towards the end of the last few months of this Gaza conflict. There's a ceasefire there, but it's holding very tenuously, and signs that it might be falling apart tonight. So what this is a sign of, really, is of the conflicts in the Middle East metastasising, and then other factors as well playing into this. So it's a sign that this war that we thought might become regional, in some ways has become regional. And it's a very unpredictable time. And, of course, the tragedy of this is that for civilians in Syria, but also in Lebanon as well, they are going to be paying the price if this leads to greater instability and more violence. Absolutely,
Dom. Thank you so much. We are going to keep you there, because we will be coming to you to look at the region as we discuss the situation, as you say, in Lebanon. But as we've been talking here, what exactly is Russia's involvement in Syria? That is a question that I'm sure many viewers will be asking, and Dom and I have been discussing. Let's speak further about this to Samuel Ramani, Associate Fellow at the Defence and Security think tank RUSI. Thank you so much for joining us, Samuel, on the programme. We've been talking about the sort of support that Vladimir Putin gave to Bashar al-Assad back in 2015, really becoming the saviour of Bashar al-Assad. And Bashar al-Assad has been heavily dependent on both Iran and Russia. The big question is, and we've seen the Russian jets getting involved over the course of the last few days in an attempt to crush these rebels, but whether they're going to be able to be as focused as they were 9 years ago.
Well, obviously, they still have those VKS fixed-wing jets, which they struggled to bring into the Ukrainian theater with the ease that many people expected, but they did use effectively in Syria, and they're using them again. But there's still a lot of things that Russia doesn't have at their disposal now that they had back from 2015 to 2017. Number one was a fairly cohesive set of ground forces. The Wagner Group mutiny of June 2023 and Prigozhin's death led to an upending of the existing ground force structure there, as well as a drawdown of personnel. Also, there's weaknesses in terms of air defenses against any attacks that might be coming from Israel, because major defenses like the S-300 are moving to Crimea. And also key aerial assets like the Su-25s are no longer flying over the Syrian skies like the way they used to. So the Russians still have the ability to launch air raids, but a lot of their most potent weaponry and their ground force cohesion, perhaps most importantly, has been upended, and that puts them on the back foot.
Yeah, and I guess, this is also a reminder that while we like to look at these regions as being distinct, actually these theatres are connected. The Russians relying on Iranian proxies in the Middle East and now, supporting the ongoing fight against these rebels, standing by Bashar al-Assad, even if, as you say, they don't necessarily have what they did at their disposal when they first started to support Bashar al-Assad.
Well, absolutely. Solidarity is really critical for the Russians in terms of supporting Assad in Syria. Like when you look at public opinion surveys of Arab millennials, the people from the ages of 18 to 30 that are being done by the Wilson Center and other nonpartisan groups, they seem to show that the Russian loyalty to a client like Assad, compared to some of the fickleness of American policy, is something that's a big advantage for the Russians. The Russian military intervention in Syria was seen by some, even in countries like Saudi Arabia, which didn't support Assad at all, as the most decisive military intervention in the Middle East since the 1991 Gulf War. That sense of strength, that solidarity, that loyalty plays well to Russia's partners across the Middle East. But the big question now is whether that loyalty can be backed up with actual material resources. And it seems as if they've been caught off guard. It seems as if they viewed the Syrian situation as a frozen conflict, and they didn't pay adequate attention to the rising violence that we were seeing in Idlib or the economic cauldron that was triggering a lot of this domestically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big concern now is watching very carefully to see if Syria once again becomes a place where great regional powers and beyond use as a space to settle scores and, fight proxy wars.
Well, yes, in an attempt to delegitimize the Syrian rebels completely, the Russians have been invoking that specter. They've been talking about how that the Russians are now engaged in a proxy war with Turkey. That's something that you see in many of the ultranationalist Telegram channels and even influencers like Alexander Dugin spouting this out. You also see the narrative that there's some kind of an Israeli jihadist or Israeli kind of ISIS linkage that the Iranians are also promoting. So the Russians and the Iranians are trying to internationalize this conflict at this stage to delegitimize the rebels who are there. Obviously, Hayat al-Sham, who are the dominant faction of that rebel group, have ties to extremist groups and were, up until a few years ago, associated with al-Qaeda. So it was quite easy to do that. I don't think right now that we have a situation where there really is a proxy war emerging. Certainly we have Russia and Iran, as well as Iraq and the Emirates showing some solidarity with the Assad regime. But we don't really see that much heavy hitting coming from the traditional backers of the rebels. It's a little bit from Turkey, but nothing really from places like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which were so important the first time around. So I think that this war can internationalize, but I think the Russians are overplaying the degree of internationalization right now to sort of rally domestic support for any kind of intervention in Syria, and also to delegitimize the genuine domestic sources of discontent with Bashar al-Assad's government.
Samuel Ramani, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you very much.
Well, in the next few minutes, we're expecting the Prime Minister to speak. He's at the Lord Mayor's banquet in central London. Dom is here with us. Dom, we're just waiting for the Prime Minister to speak, and foreign policy is something that he's going to focus on. No doubt the war in Ukraine is going to be top of the agenda.
Well, yeah, and he's running late. I don't know if the dinner's overrun or whatever, but we had expected him to start talking at sort of 10:02. We don't know what he's going to say exactly, but we expect him to sort of elaborate on the themes that we've already had sort of being laid out and fleshing out on those themes that we've heard from him, but also from his Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. And this will be, I think, an important speech because it's focusing on foreign policy. And I think it'll be a chance for Keir Starmer to sort of lay out his worldview and his expectations from his government as to how Britain places itself in this dynamically and, I think, disturbingly fast-changing world that we are in. If you look at what's happening just over the last few days, you've got protests in Romania, you've got things shifting, it seems, in Ukraine's neighbours, you've got things moving very unpredictably in Georgia, then you have this completely unexpected change of events in Syria, on top of what has been a year of extraordinary upheaval as well. And he is a Prime Minister who's talked about engagement. He's talked about, and he's already shown his willingness to engage with European partners, but also with rivals, strategic rivals. Some people see the Chinese as threats, but to talk about re-engaging with China more effectively than his predecessor did. Rishi Sunak regarded China as more of a rival and possibly a strategic threat. And so I think we need to hear from him what his position is going to be vis-à-vis China. But I think, yes, Ukraine's going to be crucial. And the big question here is, did he pick up the ball that President Zelensky kind of possibly threw him in that interview with Stuart Ramsey last week, where for the first time President Zelensky talked about the possibility of negotiations and accepted in a rather cryptic, opaque way, speaking to Stuart, but he effectively said, yes, he would be prepared if Ukraine was in a position of strength to at least hear what the Russians have to say. So having said that, and having heard that from Zelensky, is Keir Starmer prepared now to move on from the position he laid down earlier last month with Macron when he said it's important that Ukraine is strengthened ahead of winter? Is he going to talk about negotiations? And obviously, if he does so, that will be in the wake of two things. The weakening position of Ukraine militarily on the battlefield, but also Donald Trump talking about negotiations. Donald Trump, even though Russia's economy is creaking and there are signs it's really straining in its ability to carry on with this war, particularly in terms of manpower and soldiers, because it's drafting in North Korean troops, Yemeni troops. Despite all that, Donald Trump seems determined to press ahead and expedite negotiations. He wants to see some kind of negotiated settlement. And how does Keir Starmer sort of deal with that? He wants to obviously engage with Donald Trump as well, but he also wants to stand foursquare, particularly with European allies supporting Ukraine. So how do you square that circle? How do you accept the inevitability of negotiations while also wanting to continue to support Ukraine and, crucially, give Ukraine the strength it will need to have if it does go into those negotiations to not be walked over by Vladimir Putin?
Indeed. I mean, Donald Trump famously said that he could end that conflict in 24 hours. And, Vladimir Putin and others in the region have actually said, not sure how easy that is. But already we are hearing from President Zelensky last week when he spoke to Stuart Ramsey and said, if we are given protection under the NATO umbrella and brought into NATO, certainly the regions that we have, then perhaps, we're willing and able to then come to the negotiating table. I think we're about to hear from the Prime Minister, Dom, but as
he's putting some last-minute
changes and
adjusting his speech,
but no doubt, leaders like him, even Zelensky, aware of Donald Trump, the inauguration, January 20, that is when Donald Trump will be officially inaugurated. And they are looking to what he is already signalling and what he has already said about places like Ukraine, like the Middle East. And I guess, tailoring to those comments that he has made, Zelensky last week, and no doubt Keir Starmer now will be talking about Ukraine and how he thinks that negotiations potentially might unfold.
Yeah, the bottom line for the West has been that Russian aggression cannot be seen to have prevailed if negotiations happen. How do they happen without that aggression prevailing?
Let's just have a listen to the Prime Minister, who is about to begin his speech.
Honoured guests, it is a real privilege to be with you this evening here in this wonderful setting. I have to say, the double fanfare introduction you've just heard has given me a few ideas for this week's PMQs for some changes. My Lord, the Speaker says no. My Lord Mayor, it's also been a wonderful opportunity to catch up on common issues for our economy and for our country. Say, singing me your favourite anti-Arsenal chant as I was about to get up is not reflective of the progress that I thought that we were making here. Now, a few weeks ago, I stood in this very hall to urge international businesses to back Britain. And I'm pleased to say that they responded. They delivered a record-breaking £63 billion of new investment into our country. It shows that our work to put the economy on a sound footing is paying off. It shows yet again why our global relationships matter so much to this country. It also shows the vital role that you all play. So I'd like to start by saying to all of you, thank you for helping to make that happen for our country. My Lord Mayor, the tradition on this occasion is to speak on the subject of international affairs, which is good, because frankly, there is a lot to talk about. Like never before in our lifetimes, global problems have become local. Geopolitics is on our doorstep, shaping our lives in ways that nobody asked for. Conflicts overseas undermine our security, stir up violence and extremism on our streets, and drive up the cost of living. Meanwhile, climate change hits economic growth, leaves us exposed to catastrophic flooding, and both of these forces drive unsustainable levels of migration. It all manifests in a feeling amongst very many people that the system isn't working for them, that it's time to take back control of our lives, our borders, our livelihoods. And I hear that. People want action, and they want change. So we will not dismiss those concerns. We will answer them. And we will do so by acting at home, absolutely. But also by using our strength abroad. Because in this new era, we need to do things differently. There was a sense in the years of the Great Moderation that while there would always be conflicts, democratic values were in the ascendancy, and the disruptive nature of foreign policy, the real nature of foreign policy, could be contained, or at least managed. Well, from that twilight of naivety, we have emerged now into the harsh light of the day, determined to fight harder on the world stage for our national interests, and ready to dig deeper to defend them. I think of the Attlee government of 1945. Their ambition for the people of this country was unmatched. They were determined to win the peace, to create the National Health Service, build homes, national parks, a country fit for heroes. And in doing so, they knew they also needed to look out to the world. That's why they created NATO, the greatest alliance in history, tempered by the times that they had lived through. They were hard-headed and patriotic, and they saw that maintaining our strength abroad gave us the foundation to succeed at home. And that is as true today as it was then. So I want to be clear at the outset, against the backdrop of these dangerous times, the idea that we must choose between our allies, that somehow we're with either America or Europe, is plain wrong. I reject it utterly. Attlee did not choose between allies. Churchill did not choose. The national interest demands that we work with both. Our relationship with the United States has been the cornerstone of our security and our prosperity for over a century. And we will never turn away from that. We call it the special relationship for a reason. It's written not in some dry, dusty treaty, but in the ink of shared sacrifice. In the memorials, in villages, in towns, in cities, up and down the country. In Normandy, Flanders, and around the world. Right here in the Guildhall are etched the names of 112 killed in the First World War and 55 in the Second. And if you haven't had the chance, they're just near the entrance of the hall. Take the opportunity before you leave to just go and glance at those names there, inscribed on the memorial on the wall. They were fighting alongside the US, like we still do today, for the same causes. And so this is not about sentimentality. It's about hard-headed realism. Time and again, the best hope for the world and the surest way to serve our mutual national interest has come from our two nations working together. It still does. The fabric of our nations has been woven together so that our prosperity today, our leadership in tech, in AI and more, they're intertwined. And our security is also intertwined at every level of our military, our intelligence, our industry, R&D. And that's why when President Trump graciously hosted me for dinner at Trump Tower, I told him that we will invest more deeply than ever in this transatlantic bond with our American friends in the years to come. And we will rebuild our ties with Europe too. Because I'm sorry to say, the shocking legacy this government inherited in so many areas, from the nation's finances to the state of the NHS, extends beyond our shores. They turned their back on the world, took vital relationships for granted, neglected some allies and spurned others. Our reputation as a trusted, stable, dependable partner was replaced too often with an image of disarray, governed by short-term political concerns, varying from one extreme to the other, on tackling climate change, on relations with China, or even our commitment to fundamental values like the rule of law, demonising international courts, which this country helped to create, as foreign. None of this was aimed at seriously trying to solve the problems that we face. And added together, it actively harmed the national interest. In a more competitive and dangerous world, we can't take anything for granted. We need to work even harder at staying ahead. That's what the British people deserve. It's what they expect of this government. And so we're focused on the real problems, determined to rebuild and get back on the front foot, not reactive, but strategic, using our foreign policy not in the service of politics or ideology, but putting it back into the service of the British people. My Lord Mayor, there is still a huge amount of goodwill towards the UK around the world. People see our incredible strengths. They want to work with us. We've already made real progress towards renewing Britain's standing on the international stage. And we've been welcomed back with open arms. Partners are pleased to see us reconnecting, confident, outward-looking, responsible, committed to long-standing values like stability, international law, the UN Charter, and ready to lead. And I've seen how that is affecting investor confidence in our country as well, reflected in that international summit. And we have an opportunity now to capitalise on that progress, to take back control by fixing the international foundations that underpin everything that we do back here at home. That starts with our first mission, the number one test of this government: economic growth. I spoke about the £63 billion of investment that was pledged in October. Numbers like that are almost too big to grasp, but they translate into real change, new jobs in our communities, new port infrastructure in London and Lincolnshire, clean power production in Teesside, in Bristol, Suffolk and more, developing new data centres across the United Kingdom, and advancing new innovations in pharmaceuticals, battery technology and artificial intelligence. So when I talk about international investment, this is what I mean. Better lives, more opportunities, more vibrant high streets, more chances for British people to enjoy life. We are stronger when the economy is growing. We are stronger when we're cutting our dependence on fossil fuel prices by building our clean energy infrastructure. We are stronger when we lead in critical frontier technologies. And we're determined to do all of that. We've taken the difficult but vital steps in the budget, and now we're creating a climate for growth to make the UK the best place to invest, the best country to trade with, the best place to create and grow a business. And that's why we're looking outwards, deepening trade with our allies, restarting FTA talks with India, rebuilding ties in the Gulf, the Pacific and beyond, claiming our place as a leader in some of the great industries of the future, and unlocking growth, investment and pride in our economy once again. Second, my Lord Mayor, we must strengthen on security as the bedrock on which the economy sits and the ultimate guarantor of everything that we hold dear. There is no greater responsibility for this government. You know, there are moments which shape our worldview. As a young man, I remember watching the fall of the Berlin Wall. It had a profound impact on me. I felt how it was to witness a continent uniting behind freedom. I didn't think I'd ever see tanks crossing a European border again. I remember as well, much more recently, all too clearly, walking the streets of Bucha, just outside Kyiv, to bear witness to the true horror of Russia's invasion. I met people in those streets who had to pick up the bodies of their friends and their family members, civilians, killed, shot in the head, very often handcuffed, put into trolleys to be taken off for burial by their family members. A horrific reminder that Ukraine is on the front line of freedom. And let's be clear, the future of freedom in Europe is being decided today. We face a near and present danger with Russia as an erratic, increasingly desperate aggressor on our continent, marshalling all its resources, along with North Korean troops and Iranian missiles, aiming to kill and to conquer. So there's no question. It's right that we support Ukraine. But we must be clear that it's also deeply in our own self-interest to do so. I'd encourage everyone here to stop and think for a moment what it would mean to us, to our continent, to the world, if Russia wins. What would it mean for our values, for democracy, commerce, and liberty? It means they are weakened. It means that other autocrats would believe they could follow in Putin's example. And it means that our security, stability, and prosperity would be damaged. The further Russian troops advance, the closer the threat becomes. The more land they control, the more they control grain prices and energy sources, and the more confident Putin becomes. So we must continue to back Ukraine and do what it takes to support their self-defence for as long as it takes, to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace on their terms that guarantees their security, independence, and the right to choose their future. And we will continue to strengthen our own armed forces, the finest that there are. The budget provided almost £3 billion of additional resource for our defence, cementing our position as a leading NATO ally. And we will set out a clear path to increase spending from 2.3% of GDP today to 2.5%. And it is vital that all European nations step up to protect our shared future. We will set out in our strategic defence review how we're going to modernise our armed forces to make us more secure at home and stronger abroad. And we will maximise our investment by working with others, like our partnership with Italy and Japan to build the next generation of fighter planes. Because, my Lord Mayor, all of this rests on the strength of our bonds with others. And this is my third point. There is no growth without security, and no security without alliances. So to fix the foundations, we must meet this more dangerous age with an age of deeper alliances, even closer ties with the US, an unshakable commitment to NATO, and renewed relations with our neighbours in Europe. Relations which, on any objective assessment, are vital for our growth and security. So we've made progress already on the reset, agreeing regular UK-EU summits at leader level, and a shared ambition to work more closely where necessary, including through a new security pact covering foreign affairs and defence. This is about looking forward, not looking backwards. There will be no return to freedom of movement, to the customs union, the single market. Instead, we will find practical, agile ways to cooperate, which serve the national interest. We've already struck a landmark defence agreement with Germany, the Trinity House Agreement, and we're working to deepen our cooperation with France through the Lancaster House Treaties. This is a model which we will replicate with others. We will also take forward the JEF with our Baltic and Nordic allies as the tip of the NATO spear, and our AUKUS alliance with the US and Australia to support stability in the Pacific. And we'll continue to work with our partners to meet global challenges, working closely with everyone from Italy to Iraq on migration, because we all know this collaboration works in bringing the criminal gangs to justice. We will work to maintain the peace in Lebanon, end the conflict in Gaza, bring the hostages home. And every time I speak to the families of hostages, I consider the agony and the torture that they go through every day. We must, of course, also increase the flow of aid to those suffering so terribly in Gaza and other conflict zones like Sudan. And in Syria, we call again on the regime and all actors to work towards a political solution to stop the fighting. On climate change, we'll strengthen our leadership even further through new partnerships like the Global Clean Power Alliance that I launched at the G20 2 weeks ago. Because the consequence of these crises rebound on us at home. And in meeting these challenges, we must be prepared to talk to a wider range of countries. It is remarkable that until I met President Xi last month, there had been no face-to-face meeting between British and Chinese leaders for 6 years. We can't simply look the other way. We need to engage, to cooperate, to compete and to challenge on growth, on security concerns, on climate, as well, of course, as addressing our differences in a full and frank way on issues like Hong Kong, human rights, and sanctions for our parliamentarians. I'm determined to do that and to keep talking, because I believe that we are stronger when we do so. My Lord Mayor, we have so much to be proud of in this country. When it comes to our role in the world today, I want to recapture that sense of pride, to stand tall once again, to meet people's concerns, not with easy answers which don't serve anyone, but with leadership, to face up to the world as it is, shape it in our interests, and deliver more growth, more security, and stronger alliances. My Lord Mayor, I recall Philip Larkin's words about Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, that she represented a constant good, a strong still point in a changing world. I recall it because I think it also reflects Britain and the nation's role today to be a constant and responsible actor in turbulent times, to be the soundest ally, and to be determined always in everything we do, every exchange that we have with other nations, every agreement that we enter into, to deliver for the British people and show beyond doubt that Britain is back. Thank you.
That was the Prime Minister Keir Starmer giving his Lord Mayor's banquet speech there. And I've still got Dom Waghorn here with me. And Dom, he spoke about a range of issues, ending there with Britain is back, but talking about the situation in Ukraine, negotiations there. First time he's mentioned that. But of course, he also moved to the Middle East, talked about bringing the hostages home, talked about the suffering of the Palestinian people, and of course, the rebel offensive that we've seen in Syria.
Yeah, that reference to negotiations in Ukraine, I think, will make headlines tomorrow. That's a shift, significant shift from the Prime Minister. But yes, he talked about the Middle East at a time when things are shifting unpredictably and fairly fast in the Middle East, with the war now metastasising in the Syrian rebels, acquiring new momentum because of what's happening in Lebanon. And I think what we have to obviously always emphasise is that as these things happen, as wars change, it's civilians who suffer. And we talk about the most vulnerable, they are the children. In Gaza, 13,000 at least Palestinian children have died. But something that's gone less reported, I think, during this war is the number of children killed in the West Bank by the Israelis has doubled in the last year. We've looked at that closely and looked at some of the cases involved to see what's going on and why. This is our report. 9-year-old Karim needs hours of physiotherapy a week, painful but necessary, after he was shot by Israeli soldiers. His father, Shadi, showed us where the bullet entered his son's neck and left his body through his spine, leaving him paralysed from the waist down. This was the night Israelis shot Karim, ambulance paramedics fighting to save him. 11 months on, his father says the video is still hard to watch.
The first time I saw this, I ran to the bathroom to cry. I couldn't bear it. I can't handle it. It's too much for me.
This picture was taken shortly after the shooting last December. When Israeli troops entered Karim's village in the occupied West Bank, he'd been on the way to the shop, say his family. Then they opened fire. His grandfather, who carried the wounded Karim to the ambulance, says the army had no reason to shoot him.
There was nothing going on then, no clashes, nothing. Karim was just playing on the road. His mum had asked him to pick something up from the supermarket. Out of nowhere, the sound of gunfire and the voice of children screaming out that Karim had been injured.
We went to Jenin to find a family mourning one of Israel's latest child victims. The parents of 14-year-old Ryan al-Sayed told us of their loss.
I miss him every hour. I haven't slept in 2 days. Every night I feel him. He comes home to me and says, "Mum, I'm here. Mum, I can see you." When I pray, I see him in front of me, smiling. Bless him.
Israelis say Rayan had been among a group of terrorists throwing explosives at soldiers and firing on them. Claims rejected by eyewitnesses and his family. Rayan's uncle took us to the place where he was shot in October. Soldiers opened fire on the teenager, this man told us, from an armoured vehicle just 20 metres away. He fell to the ground, shot in the neck and chest. This video of him being carried away does not show anyone bearing weapons. These are the faces of the 170 children killed by Israel since October the 7th in the occupied West Bank, according to NGOs Save the Children and DCI Palestine. 70 of them were aged 15 or younger, 4 were below the age of 9. 135 were reportedly shot dead. The rest were killed by drone, warplane or artillery attacks. At least 1,400 more are thought to have been wounded by the Israeli military. In a statement, the Israel Defense Forces told Sky News Palestinian miners often participate in violent disturbances and hostile activities against security forces and Israeli citizens. In addition, terrorist organisations operate and embed themselves within the civilian population, using civilians as human shields. Every case in which a miner or civilian is killed is thoroughly investigated, says the IDF. Israelis say that includes the case of 14-year-old Rayan in Jenin, and the shooting that paralysed 9-year-old Karim is still under investigation 11 months after it happened. His family wanted us to see this video of him in happier times, playing with his brother and sister, before the Israelis shot him and put him in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. One of hundreds of families across the West Bank whose lives have been shattered by Israelis shooting their children.
Dominic Waghorn with that report. Well, earlier we heard the Prime Minister give the Lord Mayor's banquet speech. Well, Chloe Dalton, a foreign policy specialist and author who spent more than a decade working in the UK Parliament Foreign Office, including as an advisor to Willam Hague and international humanitarian Angelina Jolie. Chloe has just written a best-selling book called Raising Hare, a memoir, which took her away from her demanding job as a political advisor to care for an abandoned Leverett. Chloe, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. We'll talk about that connection in a moment, but of course you've written a lot of these Lord Mayor's banquet speeches. Just your take on what you heard from the Prime Minister tonight.
Well, two things spring to mind. One is that it has all the hallmarks of a speech that was written before the surge of events we've seen in Syria, you know, with his focus primarily on Ukraine. And the second thing that struck me was the slight adjustment in the language on support for Ukraine in the context of negotiations. So this idea of supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes to put them in the strongest possible position for negotiations is slightly different to language we've heard previously about for as long as it takes to defeat the Russian war of aggression, which was, for instance, the language used a few days ago by the head of MI6. So if I was sitting in Kiev, I'd be slightly concerned about what's driving this language about negotiations, since to outside observers, they seem to be in a position of somewhat weakness rather than strength on the battlefield. Yes, and it does seem to me that the likes of Keir Starmer, even Volodymyr Zelensky, seem to be talking directly almost to Donald Trump, who has indicated that, you know, he famously said, I can end this conflict in 24 hours. So that's what I feel like this language around negotiation, sort of using diplomacy now and wrapping things up, you know, in the battlefield. He also spoke about the situation in the Middle East. And of course, you worked alongside Willam Hague during the Arab uprisings, and we saw all the developments in Syria. It does feel very much like Back to the Future right now.
Well, I think this is the problem with what we're seeing in a lot of areas of foreign policy. Things fall out of the news, but not because they've been resolved, but because simply there is now greater and greater degrees of chaos internationally. And as you say, the war in Syria, uprising in Syria began in 2011. Here we are in 2024. And I was serving in government supporting the Foreign Secretary in the Foreign Office at the time of the vote about the prospect of limited military intervention by Britain in the context of the Syrian conflict. And, you know, there have been successive moments you can point to where opportunities were lost to intervene, to find a political solution, to stop the conflict worsening. And here we are with this additional headache on top of everything else that this government and our allies are trying to achieve in foreign policy.
Chloe, we have about a minute left on the programme, but I have to mention your book, Raising Hare, because it's such a beautiful, thoughtful book. And you suddenly found yourself in lockdown looking after a leveret.
Yes, and the book is about this sort of very joyful experience that took me away from the kinds of issues that we've been describing, but they were also in some kind of way part of it. I think sometimes we do need to see things that give us hope amid all of this gloom, and my book is an expression of that. It's about a journey of discovery, about experiencing the wild, about trust between humans and the wild, and restoring the kind of balance between humans and nature that we also need to see in a broader kind of balance internationally when we talk about foreign policy and human rights.
Chloe, it's a beautiful book, Raising Hare. It's a memoir, but also a really beautiful sort of nod to nature and animals. Thank you so much, Chloe, for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, the news at 10 is next. Good night for now.